What's up everyone, it's Q from Retro Q Gaming, and I want to open this video by saying this is a constructive criticism video, or at least in the parts where I do, quote, criticize, unquote, stuff, it's constructive. It's not overly negative for the point of being negative. It's not, I'm not doing it just to bash people or bash developers or companies or hardware or anything like that. I'm doing it because it's a relatively potentially small thing depending on the side of the spectrum you're on, but it could be a relatively small thing that can possibly be changed, probably be changed I should say, and it's to overall enhance an experience in general. So remember, you may hear a couple of things in this video that you don't agree with. That's fine if you don't agree with them. But I'm not saying it to bash a company, or I'm not doing it to fanboy behind a different company or anything like that. And I'm not being an elitist. It's easy for people to misunderstand what I say and just think, oh, well, he's a PC elitist. Yet, despite me playing other games as well, and it just doesn't make sense. So what I'm going to go with anyway is, first off, this video, I'm obviously talking about Until Dawn, which released last week, a couple of days ago on the PS4. And Until Dawn is, the best way to describe it is an interactive drama style game. If you're familiar with Fahrenheit or Indigo Prophecy, same game depending on where you live, or Heavy Rain, or Beyond Two Souls. They're all the same kind of games. Now, this isn't made by Quantic Dream. The three previous games I just listed are made by Quantic Dream, but this is made by Supermassive Games. Now, at the same time, they are the same style of game, in the sense that with how the story is, how the gameplay and the interactions and all that is made, they're the same style of game. They're not exactly the same, obviously, but they're the same style. And of course, this is a horror variant rather than what was the variant in the other three games. So it's first off, I've been playing this for a few days now, and I've made some decent progress. I'm told there's 10 chapters, and I'm on chapter 7 or 8. This video is all captured early in the start, specifically because I do want to avoid spoilers for people, and I do want to avoid spoilers in this audio I'm giving as well. So there will be minimal, if any, spoilers at all. I'm going to try specifically keep away from it. So anyway, I've spent a good amount of time, and I'm about 3/4 through the game. So I do feel like that I've noticed some stuff so much and with such frequency and consistency, is that I felt that it's a legitimate, I won't call it argument, but it's a legitimate gripe, and it can be used as constructive criticism at this point. So there's a couple of ways of it. As you're probably seeing in this video, the frame rate is not the best. Now, straight away I realize people are reaching for their keyboards to just hit me with them, but like I said, I'm not bashing. It's like, this game isn't 120 frames per second, it's a piece of shit. I'm not doing that. Okay, I'm not doing that. I understand a game like this does not need to be 60 frames per second. If it was, it would be nice, but that's not the point, okay? Now, so the game generally aims for a 30 frames per second kind of thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't keep that very much. Towards the start of the game, yes, it keeps it a decent amount of time, but usually the game is obviously very story and cutscene heavy. So when either there's multiple people on screen, be it during a cutscene or in game, the frame rate does take a significant hit, and it's very jarring, and I won't say completely immersion breaking. Personally, when it does kick in for me, I see it and I just think, oh, for fuck's sake, kind of thing. Now, I realize not everyone has that reaction to it. It's probably just my personal preference, and this is where someone could understand me being an elitist. It's simply because I'm more used to playing games at a significantly higher frame rate. Now, I'm not going to get into those details because, people will just understand it as being a PC elitist or a PC fanboy, but I'm not doing that because that's not what it's about. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to enjoy Until Dawn, and I do enjoy Until Dawn. But like I said, however, when multiple people are on screen at once, be it cutscenes or in games, or when there's significant weather effects, and this is a game that is set on a snowy mountain at night in the middle of a snowstorm. So obviously there are a lot of environmental effects which all take their toll on the frame rate. So like I mentioned a minute ago, the problem with it is that even though they aim for 30 frames per second a lot of the time, well, they aim for 30 frames per second, it's very inconsistent with how they hit it. And towards like the halfway mark in the game and beyond, or at least beyond up to where I am, like I said, I'm only on chapter 7 or 8, but it spends more often than not, it spends time arguably south of 20 frames per second. And that can be really annoying during a longer protracted sequence, especially when you get into, like I said, I'm just gonna use random examples pop from my head, but these usually won't be in the game to avoid spoilers. But when you're, say, the game requires heavily on well, not heavily, but the game relies jump scares. So naturally, something is going on. It's very tense. It's very quiet, and then a jump scare is obviously something that's really fast and loud, as quick as possible. A lot of the time, the specific jump scares in Until Dawn, it'll be doing that. You'll be in a small area or an area, whatever, and the frame rate will be okay because there won't be much going on. And then as you're about to do something, when whatever it is going to whenever the jump scare is about to occur, the frame rate kind of starts slowing down a little bit, and it's not for dramatic effect. You can actually tell it's kind of a PlayStation 4. I don't want to say limitation because it's going to sound overly negative, but it sounds like it's an engine/hardware struggle at the time. But now remember, I know I've said it a million times at this point in the video, but I'm not bashing the hardware or anything like that. I'll get onto the exact reasoning and all behind it now in a minute. But when the jump scare actually occurs, a little bit before it occurs, the frame rate starts chugging along. And then when it actually does occur, it's really, really choppy. I mean, to the point where you're down in what appears to be single-digit FPS. And it's times like that that's really, I want to say immersion breaking at this point. But it's really disheartening and jarring at the time. So unfortunately, that does actually happen more often than not with the jump scare things. More often than not, the frame rate for them does come to a grinding halt. A lot of the time as well, as I mentioned, even when you're just walking around, if you're walking where there's the graphics in Until Dawn are actually really good, as you can probably tell by this video. And if you've played the game, the graphics are actually really good. And whenever you're going through a place with a lot of lighting effects or a lot of shadows or, like I said, a lot of environmental effects, the frame rate can also take a hit. So, I mean, you can be going through a relatively slow-paced area. You could just be exploring a small standard room with basically nothing going on just because of lighting and shadows and stuff. And the frame rate will be kind of chucking along. So that's really not the greatest experience at the same time. Another one that comes in, because the game obviously has a couple of action scenes, as you'd expect. They're all heavily QTE based, just like any of the other three games I mentioned at the start of the video, Heavy Rain, etc. So the game is obviously, in an action scene. It's action. It's fast paced. Most of the time, there's a couple of action scenes at the start of the game that aren't hindered by any frame rate issues at all. But towards maybe the middle of the game onwards, pretty much every action scene is marred by significant performance drops, and that they can actually get to the point where it starts affecting the actual response on your gameplay, because when the frame rate is all over the place, specifically when it's extremely low, your button presses don't always register properly. So that can, and in a game like this, that's a big deal. Usually it's a significant deal anyway, but in a game like this, where a missed button press can literally be the difference between life or death, it's a very big issue. So the fact that it happens again so often, especially towards the latter half of the game, is a significant worry. And I'm sure there's ways around it, but excuse me, I just almost had a magic sneeze there out of nowhere. But there was another one. Oh, excuse me again if you heard those. But it's really disheartening, and at the same time as well, there's not a 30 FPS cap. However, obviously the game struggles to maintain 30 FPS as it is. But when you get into a small area, say when you go to open a door and there's a little kind of door opening cutscene, you can see because there's so little to render and so little effects and all on the screen, you can actually see the frame rate jump right up to like 40, 50, close to 60 FPS for those 1 or 2 split seconds. And I don't think that takes away in the sense that it highlights how, I don't want to say bad. Bad is not a good example of the word I would use. I don't think it's a good idea or I don't think it hurts the game, I should say, because it highlights how many issues, if you will, that the previous scene, yeah, actually, would have. But it's really jarring to see something like that in a game like that just pop up out of nowhere. It's the same, like I said, when you're opening doors and things like that, or when you're picking stuff up off the ground, or when you're picking stuff up off a desk or something. It's got a very good system where it's similar to The Order 1886. So I mean, you could see like a photo on a desk, and you can pick up the desk. It obviously zooms in on the character's hand, and you can rotate it as you need, and you can look around with it that way. Usually during scenes like that, not always, there are some of those that are marred by like 10 FPS drops as well, simply because there might be environmental effects or lighting effects at the same time, or the game is processing someone walking around in the background. But the problem is, that's another time where you can pick up things like that and suddenly your frame rate jumps up to 45, 50, close to 60 FPS, and then you let go of R2 and you go back to the actual gameplay and you're dropping to 30 or below. So one thing I would like to see on top of before I get into the main part of it, but one thing I would like to see would be a 30 FPS cap. Now, it doesn't have to be a lock, because obviously the game is currently incapable of doing that. Once again, don't bash me for saying that. It's constructive. I'm trying to be constructive about that part of it. So don't just instantly try to pick up your keyboards and hit me with them. So I would like to see the option of a 30 frames per second lock, even if it's very rare that you'd be going above it, and the points that you do are, they're not really important, because like I said, it's just a door opening cutscene, or one of the little things where you're picking something up and just looking at it. So because of that, I would like to see the lock. And something I kind of wish that was done originally, well, I say originally, but when the game was actually being developed, I would have liked to seen maybe 1 or 2 little, be it whatever, effects or textures or whatever the hell it is, dialed back just a little bit, mainly to get better, consistent performance. Now, it does, fair enough, in a perfect world, it would, in a game like this anyway, because they were aiming for 30 frames per second, in a game like this, in a perfect world, it would be a consistent 30 FPS. But unfortunately, that's not going to happen. So if it was to remain high 20s even for a significant portion of time, that would be brilliant. And of course, okay, I mean, maybe we'll get a performance patch. Maybe they can work out even more optimizations, and a week from now we'll get an additional performance patch or something like that. Maybe we'll get a frame rate cap. But even if we don't, it would have been nice to see in the development process that 1 or 2 things were dialed back, simply because they say, hey, wait a minute, excuse me, they had realized that, the game looks great, but we're getting some really bad, we're getting some consistent, really bad, really frequent performance issues. Maybe let's dial 1 or 2 things back just a small bit, because, like I said, the graphics are brilliant for a PS4 game. Graphics are great. So because of that, they could probably dial back 1 or 2 things just a little bit. Now, like I said, just a little bit. So it's not going to drop it down to looking like every other game, or it's not going to drop it down to looking like a PS3 game or anything like that. But I'm just saying, it would drop it down a little bit to the point where the gameplay would be, it wouldn't be as affected by such large performance drops. And like I said, I don't feel like I'm over exaggerating this. It got to the point where I was playing this last night, and it got to the point where after I booted the game up, I played it for about maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, and I don't think the entire time, I'd say the entire time, the frame rate was struggling. Yeah, I mean, I was probably hovering around the mid to low 20s for the entire time, short of one or two action scenes, which dropped even lower. So that's an issue. To get a protracted game session like that to be just completely marred by issues like that is very, I won't say it's very disheartening. It's very unfortunate because, like I said, I do enjoy Until Dawn. I enjoy this type of gameplay, and I specifically enjoy Until Dawn as well. And for those of you out there who probably think I'm bashing the PlayStation or bashing the hardware or whatever, I don't. I don't think so. And I wish the development teams that make games like these could potentially make one little sacrifice or whatever it is just to get that consistent frame rate and all as well, because I do think it would benefit the game and your experience with the game overall in the long run as well. One thing I'll note as well, this just to reiterate how much they're pushing the graphics and the processing of the actual PS4 in this, is we all know the Order 1886 is one of the better graphically visual games on the PS4. And until I had played Until Dawn, which is also a really great looking PS4 game, until I had played Until Dawn, the Order 1886 was the only one that would make my PS4 fan go into overdrive, simply because it's pushing the PS4 so hard. It's pushing the hardware so hard, so it heats up because it's working harder. The fan needs to go faster to remove all the heat faster, simply because it's basically a byproduct. If you're pushing the hardware faster to get better results, it heats up faster and to hotter temperatures, and the fan needs to compensate for that. So it spins faster to work harder, and it gets louder. So because of the Order 1886 being one of those games that make the PS4 work really hard, or made the PS4, I said maked. Laugh cough, okay. But to reiterate how great Until Dawn looks and how much it's pushing the PS4, is Until Dawn actually does the same thing with my PS4. It makes the fan speed up really fast. So I'm assuming the PlayStation 4 is working significantly harder to push out these really good graphics. Now, before anyone asks, I do keep my gaming areas relatively clean. I dust off every week or two, so I make sure all the vents on all my consoles, PC, etc. are not covered and caked in dust. So it's not that. It's not that it's struggling because it's caked in dust. My PS4 is very clean. I double checked it because once I heard the fan going so hard in Until Dawn, then once I had turned the console off during that gaming session, I actually checked and was like, yeah, okay, I cleaned these up on like Thursday, so it's still fine and it's still pretty good. So it will be nice to see all these improvements on, because at the end of the day, one or two very slight, I'm not asking for the textures to be cut in half, one or two slight adjustments could have made a big difference on the overall experience with the game. Because I do like Until Dawn. I do. I really like it. It's a really good game. And it would have been a significantly better experience, if you ask me, if it was to have, like I said, I don't want to say a consistent 30 frames per second, but even if it was to have a consistently higher frame rate, especially during action scenes and jump scares, that would be the biggest thing. Like I said, in a perfect world, this game would run at a solid 30 or 60 FPS, but I'm being realistic. So I mean, I think it's a bit unreal to ask for that kind of thing, but it's just, I would like to see that kind of thing, and not just for Until Dawn, but I'd like to see developers in the future take these things into consideration before they actually put out a game. And there's also one other little part that you've probably picked up on that I haven't really fully touched on yet, but basically, on top of all the stuff we've covered in this video so far, I do want to quickly just put in the details of the last one as well. The control system is it's a bit shaky and a bit wobbly for two reasons really. One, the moving around controls and all is fine, like the actual movement is fine. It does get plagued a little bit during low frame rate moments, and especially like that's kind of hard. But especially as well is we have the Until Dawn uses what's basically a flashlight looking style system. So most of the time your characters will either have a light of some sort, or even if they don't, it can still be used in the same way. So you look around with the right stick. So the right stick will, point your flashlight or your character's head wherever it is to go, and it will highlight stuff that you can interact with if they're looking in that general direction. Now, the problem is it's so inconsistent a lot of the time. For example, you could be in an area where the camera is just panning straight forward at you, and your character could be facing the left side of the screen, and you could push left on the right stick to move whenever I mention looking around, it's going to be with the right stick. So I'm not throwing in directions the whole time. I'll just probably say stick. So you're looking around. You want to look left. So you move the stick and you'll move it to the left, and suddenly your character looks up, or your character will look right, and it's very inconsistent because you could turn the opposite way, and left on the same stick would actually turn it left, or it would turn it right. It's very inconsistent. It's very inconsistent. I've had points where I couldn't actually look in a certain direction because of the camera and just how it handled. I mean, at one point, because I could easily see something I wanted to interact with, but I couldn't actually interact with it because I couldn't look in the general direction. So what I did was I stood beside it, and it would have been on my character's right at this point. So it would have been about 90 degrees to my character's right. And I actually moved the stick in every possible direction. And the character looked in every possible direction except for where I wanted the character to look. So then I turned and I faced it. And I still couldn't look in certain directions. Even while facing a different way, I still couldn't look in certain directions. And like I said, it's still very inconsistent as well, because your character can face the camera. You can literally stand facing the camera, and in some areas when you're facing the camera, if you move the stick left, your character's thing will go to the left. If you move the stick to the right, sometimes it will go to the left, even while you're in the same kind of position, facing the same kind of camera location. Some of the times it doesn't even make sense at all. You'll push left and it will go like up. It's really, really weird and inconsistent. And one other quick last little gripe I have with the camera controls, or not the camera controls, the flashlight looking around controls, is that during low frame rate sections as well, which become extremely more prevalent towards the end of the game, as I mentioned, it does take a significant hit during the, trying to actually move the flashlight and all around while you're in a lower frame rate section. It does take a hit, and it can be harder to actually do stuff around, and you can miss stuff. Like, you could be walking a bit, shining your flashlight around, and because the frame rate will be chugging along, and you might be dropping like 5, 10, 15 frames every so often, and you might just actually miss something you've gone by. I've almost had it happen to me a couple of times, and luckily I barely noticed it at the last split second. So that's something that also ties into the frame rate issues. But at the same time, I do feel that the control system for it could be tightened up in general, not just in the sense of the frame rate styles, but I do feel like the frame rate influence, I should say, but the control system, or at least the looking around system, could be slightly tightened up. Because in my personal opinion, I know you can disagree with me, whatever, but in my personal opinion, like I said earlier in this video, I do think it would deliver an overall better experience at the end of the day, and your time spent with it would be significantly more enjoyable if the frame rate was considerably and consistently better. So that's my opinion on it anyway. If you're curious on what I actually thought about Until Dawn, I'm sure as you've noticed in this video, I do actually enjoy it and I do recommend you go play it. It's not a review, just saying. I don't do reviews, I'm just giving my opinions on games. But if you do like games like Fahrenheit or Indigo Prophecy, depending on where you live, I don't know why they changed the title for it, but if you like that, Heavy Rain, Beyond Two Souls, this is definitely a game for you, especially if you like horror games as well. So give it a try if anything like that tickles your fancy. But let me know in the comment section below a couple of different things I want to know here. Let me know what you think about any of the issues I raised in this video, be it performance issues, a possible cap, a possible slight downgrade, I hate using that word, downgrade of one or two minor things just to get the frame rate up. Let me know if you've fallen victim to any of the bad frame rate issues, like if something, I hate to say it again, but breaks your immersion, or if you've fucked up a QTE or action event because the frame rate has been all over the place. Let me know all of that in the comment section below, as well as what you think of Until Dawn if you've played it, or what you think of Until Dawn if you haven't played it. It's all the same. I want to hear it all. So let me know all that in the comment section below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. You can follow me on Twitter, details in the description below. Thank you for watching. I will see you on the rest of the videos in my channel as I go back and play Until Dawn and try to survive Until Dawn.